Throwback bikes. In this video, I'm going to be demonstrating the installation of our MOLLE crate quick release kit. Now you can take your crate with you. Check it out. This is the hardware that is required to install the quick release kit. We have our feet that are going to go on the bottom of the crate, and that makes it where our shoulder bolts, which are right here, aren't just sticking out of the bottom of your crate, so you can still set your crate down. That's what those feet are for. We have some long 20mm M5 bolts. Those go for these feet. These feet have nuts already pressed in them. If they happen to have fallen out in the hardware bag, you can just push them back in, maybe hold them in with a screwdriver while you're installing them. As soon as the threads get started, it's not that big of a deal. These are our guides that help our shoulder bolts end up in the right place. You can see these slots here and one there. These have some little bushings sticking out, and these are for alignment in the rack. They are very important. If you don't see them sticking out of these parts, they stick out a little less in this one, you need to look in the hardware bag, because if they aren't used, the alignment won't be precise enough for this thing to work reliably. We've got some washers. These are our shoulder bolts. These are going to be installed in the crate. We have a foam damper and a zip tie to hold that in place. There's a special groove to keep the zip tie in place. You should also have the appropriate M5 hardware to attach these guides, and 3 of these nylock nuts will also be used on the shoulder bolts, as well as some of the washers. Then we have our latch. It has a cover, and we want to make sure that we use that to keep debris out of the spring. And we have some M4 hardware that is going to be used to attach the latch. So that's all the hardware. For installation, the only tools you will need are a 2.5mm hex or Allen key, a 3mm hex Allen key, a 7mm wrench, 8mm wrench, or I'm going to be using an 8mm socket. Step 1 here is to build your Throwback Bikes MOLLE crate. If you haven't done that, follow the instructions that came with it. It's really easy to assemble, but if you are assembling for the first time, you can, as you can see, mine's a little dusty, it's been at the beach. If you are assembling for the first time, you can leave this hardware out, because that is where we are going to install our feet on the bottom. I have already assembled this, and then I just went and removed this. Set that hardware aside. We'll probably reuse a washer or 2, but you may not need to, because I'll probably have enough extra washers in the hardware kit. So, step 1, let's get the feet attached. Okay, so to install these feet, we need our 20mm long M5 screws. Those are going to come through the inside, and I'll pop one through here. That will be held in place with the 3mm hex key, and the nut and the foot goes on from the outside. And I can't do that with one hand, so I will show you how it turns out. We've got one foot in place. That was easy as could be. There's our dusty crate and our 20mm M5. Again, I just held that with my hand, and I was able to get it tight enough. The nut inside there is a nylock, so that means that it's locking on. It's going to be resistant to vibration and coming loose, so you don't have to tighten it like crazy. These are plastic, and if you go totally He-Man on this thing, you can break it. So no need. They're really tough. Just get them snug. So now I'm going to repeat for the other 3 corners. I'll be right back. So we now have all 4 feet in place, and That allows a little bit of space underneath here, and you'll find out why that's important right now. The next step is to install our shoulder bolts. You should have 3 of them, 2 shorter ones and 1 longer one. And how these are going to install are on the bottom of our crate. There are a lot of holes because our crate mounts to many different bikes, so it should be easy to identify though, because there are smaller holes, and these smaller holes are where the shoulder bolts go. So we have 2 on one side, and those are for our shorties. And then if you look on the other side, there is 1 smaller hole, so that is for this. This will require a washer on both sides, so I'm going to slip a washer over this side, which I will do now, maybe one-handed. The steel washer is going to protect the crate, and it's also putting it at precisely the right height. So if you do not use a washer on this side, it will not function properly. So make sure there's a washer under all of the shoulder bolts, and then on the other side we'll use a washer under the nut. Something to point out, our early generation or first generation crates can only be mounted in this orientation. So that is the long direction of the crate. Our latest version, you will have an extra set of holes here that will allow you to mount the crate turned 90 degrees. Our first generation crate, you will see these smaller holes, but they are not going to work. It can only be mounted in this direction. So those are all of our crates that were made in 2021. So our second generation started in March of 2022. And it should be really easy to tell because our first generation is very thick material. It's 1/8 inch. We have since switched to lighter weight, but still very strong 90 thou. So again, if your material is 3 millimeters or 1/8 of an inch thick, it can only be mounted in the long orientation, which is going to be what I'm demonstrating in this video. So we'll get our washers and our shoulder bolts in place, and then I'll flip this thing sideways and I'll be putting our hardware on the inside. Okay, our shoulder bolts are in place. You can see the washers underneath each of the shoulder bolts. Very important, do not forget the washers. If you do, it will not work properly. From the inside, we have our 8mm, or I'm sorry, our M5 nylock nuts with washers under them, and those will use either your 8mm wrench or your 8mm socket to install those. Don't have to go crazy tight. You can hold these from the outside with a 3mm hex. So that is it for the crate. As you can see, our feet stick out slightly longer, which allows us to set our crate flat, and it's not going to wobble and damage those shoulder bolts. So next steps, we will move on to the bike and get the rest of this hardware installed on the rack. We have got our Super 73 S2 back rack here. All of our back racks use the same top plate, and that means that they will all accept the quick release, except for our Z1, because the unique geometry of the Z1 means that we do not have mounting holes. We had to be creative, and we are using this hole. So quick release will not work on the Z1, but on all of other racks this will work. To make this easier to install, I'm actually just going to pull this plate off, and I'll do this on the bench. It can definitely be done on the bike. It just makes it a little easier to get a wrench in there to attach our latch, so we're going to put it on the table. It is not necessary to take off the entire rack. We are just going to be removing the top plate. That can stay put. This has our pannier plates on it, but anyhow, it's just going to hang out, and we'll be back to install this once we have the quick release kit on it. Okay, we are ready to complete our installation of our quick release kit. We have our latch, we have the M4, which will be the smaller hardware, only bolts and nuts, no washers. We have our M5 hardware that will be installing these guides, and we have our top plate. So to start, I am going to be installing this latch on the bottom side of this plate. So you can see those 4 holes. We'll line up with those 4 holes. We will be inserting our bolts from the top side, again with no washers. So 4 bolts will go through. Our latch and our nuts will go on the bottom side. So I am going to do that, and I will show you what that looks like. Okay, we have the hardware started for our latch, and like anything, it's always a good idea, well, I guess in most cases, to get the hardware started before you tighten any of them. We are going to tighten now with a 2.5mm hex key and a 7mm wrench, and there is a bit of play in this. So as we get it snug, we're going to want to sight it through that hole and make sure that our latch is centered, and if it is, we'll snug down all 4 of these bolts with the nuts on the bottom side. Okay, we have got our latch installed. As you can see, it is centered. I did want to point out that on the bottom of the latch there is a cover. This shiny formed sheet metal piece here, here's a spare one, is what covers the spring mechanism on the latch. And that's important. If we get a bunch of debris in there, it's going to make it where this latch doesn't work as reliably. So make sure that it does not look like this. It looks like this. And those are snug, so now we can move on to these pieces. One more thing, wanted to point out that the part that I am seeing through here is the part that moves out of the way. So that means that towards the back of the bike, which is back here, this is where we will reach under and pull the latch. This is the release. So if you put that on backwards, this definitely will not work. Okay, the next step is to install the all-important plastic guides. These are critical to the function of the quick release. You can see that little keyhole shape there and the double keyhole shape here, and you might notice that there is a single one there and a double one here. So that is how we can tell the orientation. That shape should line up with the metal part of the rack. Again, I pointed out when we were showing these earlier that there is a bushing sticking out of the bottom. That is very important. If those are missing, look in your hardware bag. We might even include some extra ones, because if this is installed without the bushings, it will move around way too much, and things won't work right. So you should be able to find that, and it'll fall right in place, and it won't move around very much. So that is our front. This is our rear. Again, that shape, does that match that? Nope, it needs to spin. And the bushings are on the bottom, sticking out as well. So when we put it in place, it falls into place on both sides and doesn't move. So now attaching this is a breeze. We're just going to put a washer on a nut, drop those through the top of all 4 holes, and put a washer and a bolt goes through the top, and a washer and a nut goes through the bottom. Okay, we have our guides in place. When installing those, we want to make sure that they end up flat to the aluminum with no gaps. Make sure that everything is aligned properly, nothing's moving around. And our final step is a pretty simple one. This is the foam damper. This thing's going to help ensure that we don't have any excess vibrations when the crate is in place, and should be fairly straightforward. It fits right over those holes, and the shape of it here nests right along the back of this guide. And that groove down the middle is where our zip tie is going to lay. So we're going to place our zip tie around the foam, through the slots, and all the way around the latch. We're going to put our buckle of our zip tie on the bottom side, and then we will snip off any extra length after we snug that down. So I'll do that, and we'll see how that looks. Okay, we've got our foam damper zip tied in place. You can see a little bit of compression is good. We don't need to go crazy because we do want to keep the full height of that in multiple places to make contact with the bottom of our crate. So I will cut off the excess of the zip tie, and then we are ready to slap this back on the bike. Pretty straightforward here. If you installed your rack, you remember how to do this. So we will lay this in place. Logo goes towards the front of the bike, and we'll get our hardware back in place, and then we are ready to attach our crate. Okay, plate is installed on the bike again. We have our crate. So, a couple things to notice. We have a front and a back to our crate now. The front will be the single shoulder bolt. The back will have twin shoulder bolts. So, two in the back, one in the front, because we have two slots in the back, one hole in the front. Okay, now let's talk about how to get this thing on. Okay, we are ready to install our crate on our rack. And to do that, we will be taking those two shoulder bolts, dropping them into the larger part of those two keyhole shapes. So I'm going to get down here and watch that happen. There we go. We see that they came through. Now I'm going to slide the crate rearward. You saw that slide to the back of those slots. And we're going to check. The front shoulder bolt should want to fall through at this point. It's not falling through on this one, which means that we're going to slightly loosen this bolt. Hopefully we don't have to loosen those as well. And again, this is on our first generation crate. We've since made the tolerance a lot tighter on these holes, so this tuning step may not be necessary, but what we're wanting to happen right now is this to fall in. And this only has to happen during the initial setup here, and then after this it should be a total breeze. So I'm going to loosen this, see if that bolt can move back slightly in this hole and fall through, and if it does, I will tighten it back up and we will try this again. Okay, now let's get this put on. Whoop, got that backwards. We want our two shoulder bolts in the back for those two slots, a single shoulder bolt in the front for the single hole. Step one, drop the two shoulder bolts in. You can see them come through there. Then we're going to slide it back. So, rear ones drop in, slide back. Front one will fall through the hole. So, we saw that fall through the hole. Step two is going to be to slightly slide it forward. So it's going to be a little bit rattly, slid forward. Now we're just going to push down on the front, and that should press the latch back and click into place. If you don't hear it click, you need to reach underneath, grab the release, and then with a slight pressure on the front, you will hear it click. So now we are latched. That is on. It is shaking the whole bike. So that was it. It's on right now. It's not going to move. To release it, to take the crate off, we're going to do that in reverse. So to remove, reach underneath, get them underneath the rack. You'll feel this handle right here and pull that to the back. As that pulls back, you want to lift up on the front. And then we will slide the entire crate to the back while slightly lifting up on the front of the crate, and then wiggle it forward. And it's a little tricky to do with one hand, but you can kind of see we're right back where we started. The front bolt is out. The rear two bolts are lined up with their keyholes, and we should be able to lift this out. Again, not the easiest thing to do with one hand, but we did it. And once you do this a few times, you'll get used to it. It might seem a little clunky at first, but after you've done this several times, it's going to be second nature. And to prove it, we'll do that again, one-handed. Drop the rear bolts in, slide the entire thing to the back. Front bolt drops in, push forward, reach underneath, pull while pressing down with the camera hand here, and we are on. So, you will find that after you do this a few times, again, it gets a lot easier. It shouldn't rattle. If you hear a rattle, potentially things aren't latched. So if you can look underneath here, I'm going to kind of zoom in. Oh, that's a great shot there. So you want to see this shoulder bolt underneath this latch. I'm going to pull on the release right now, and you'll see that is not latched. It can lift up and down. So if you hear it rattling, it may be necessary to press down, and it will be latched. You may also find if you have a lot of weight in the crate, it might slide back. That second step, we talked about pushing it forward. So to demonstrate, I'm going to unlatch it, and if you see the shoulder bolt in that hole up there, you'll see that if this slid back, it's still possible to latch, but it can slide side to side, and we don't want that. So it is important that it makes its way up into the front of this, which is going to reduce how much it can move around. So we'll push it forward and press down, and it's much happier. If you find it rattling and you have to stop and push down on that often, you may want to consider also, it might not like the bumpy roads you're on and the heavy load that you may have in this thing. So it will not come off. You don't have to worry about that. It's not gonna go flying with all of your groceries, but maybe a bungee cord, just to kind of reinforce it here, is a good idea. Again, this is for convenience. This is not meant to hold incredibly heavy loads on very rough surfaces. Hey, thanks for watching. We hope that answered any questions you might have about the installation of our quick release kit. If it didn't, leave us a comment below.